Chapter 1. Ivy was awakened by a wild burst of gunfire, which had been going on for almost a week now. A week ago, unrest in Afghanistan led to a fierce exchange of fire between anti-government forces and Afghan government troops. With a stalemate between the two sides, the capital of Afghanistan is full of smoke and war, and there is no telling how many innocent lives have been lost in the flames of war. Fortunately, the embassy is still safe. The Afghan government and China have always been good friends, and the anti-government forces do not dare to easily offend the big powers. That's just that today, the fighting is extraordinarily intense. Sister, are we going to die? The soft, sticky voice of a child sounded beside Ivy. The little girl's name is Emma. Her parents are in Afghanistan doing business. A week ago her father was killed in a gunfight, her mother was lost and has not been found. I don't think it's going to end too well. Emma was taken to the embassy. After witnessing her father's death she has become quiet. Ivy takes her with her every day. It won't. Ivy rubbed Emma's head, and since the situation in Afghanistan has taken a sharp turn for the worse, many expatriates have taken up residence in the embassy so that they can be escorted out when the Chinese soldiers arrive. After a close rumble of artillery fire, the small building in which the embassy was located shook violently. Ivy quickly pulled Emma out from under the covers. These days they slept with their clothes on. Ivy put Emma's shoes on and pulled her outside. There was another shaking of the ground, and Ivy and Emma were shaken and rolled to a corner of the house, and there was a constant noise of artillery and gunfire, and a mingling of shrieks and cries outside of the Ivy picks up a terrified Emma and rushes outside, and as soon as she opens the door there's a puff of smoke and the embassy caught fire under artillery fire. Shit, the crowd of people who had taken refuge had long since lost order. And the hisses and cries rang clearly in Ivy's ears. In the midst of the roaring flames, Ivy began to think of the man that so many years have passed since then. She deliberately cut off contact with that side of the family over the past few years, and never went back, in an attempt to force herself to forget about him. But at a time like this, he's the first thing she thinks of. She smiled to herself, and if she really dies here this time, she won't even be able to see him again. She began to regret her flight, to regret her cowardice, to regret as if she had pulled out her heart and roasted it in a blazing fire. But the bigger the fire got, the thinner the oxygen got, and Ivy could feel her life slowly draining away from her. Ivy had tears hanging from the corners of her eyes. This was probably God punishing her. Never to see him again, never to see her grandmother again, never to see those of her relatives who were either close or not so close to her. But what did the little girl beside her do wrong? She was probably really close to dying, and in the bright light of the fire she actually saw a man at the end of the corridor running against the firelight, with a determined pace, and in the blazing firelight. The man was not the least bit intimidated, so firm, so calm. And Ivy saw the man's face scorched red, and he frowned, as he had done so many years before, and called her name Ivy. Ivy couldn't believe her eyes. It wasn't until the man stood at her side that she was sure that it was he who had come to the Emma had fainted from the smoke, and Ivy, with her arms in the air, entrusted the child to Michael to lead her away. He didn't say a word, he didn't move a muscle, he just looked at her, like he was trying to see right through her. And 3 years, 1,000 days and nights, 26,000 hours, 10,000 kilometers. 12 hours of flight, a heartfelt rush, for the country, for the displaced citizens. And for her, the situation in the Afghan capital deteriorated dramatically from the time the mission was received to the time the aircraft landed. The commandos had come to cooperate with the evacuation, and when they arrived in Afghanistan they were told that anti-government and government forces had exchanged fire in front of the embassy, and that the anti-government forces had attacked the embassy with malice aforethought. The embassy was already in flames. He and his comrades risked their lives to go in and save the people, but Ivy was not among those rescued. Michael thought, with a fluke, that maybe she had another assignment and went out until Lucas told him, Captain, that there were 2 other people in the embassy, Ivy from the translation division and a little girl who had been rescued and returned the other day. Counselor, whose eyes had been incomparably sorrowful, just now the situation is too critical. He and a few other staff members were busy to calm the panicked people and cooperate with the commando team to evacuate, but even forgot that there are still people inside the room, that the building was in flames. Michael licked the corners of his mouth. Lucas, take care of the people in the building. Liam, find a spot and be ready to snipe at all times. The rest of you take your positions. I'm going in to save the day, and I'm going in to save the day. Unaware of the number of anti-government forces around him, Michael, against all opposition, unhesitatingly charged into the flames again, alone now, with Ivy right in front of him, more real than he'd seen her in his dreams countless times over the course of 3 years, and yet, she told him to take the child and go. What about her? Stay here and die in the fire? He looked at her soberly. as if he had stood still, and there was hate and celebration in that gaze, so complex it was heartbreaking, and so blazingly hot as the fire that the Michael, without speaking, copied her hand and took the child she carried and fixed it securely in his arms, and drew her to him again, shielding her at his side, that the corners of Ivy's mouth turned up involuntarily. And she followed close behind Michael, that the fire engulfed everything. There was a sudden, earth-shattering bang behind us. Michael quickly pulled her into his arms, carrying Emma and Ivy, and rolled down several flights of stairs. The second floor of the embassy has been completely engulfed in fire. Ivy was in Michael's arms. Suddenly she wasn't afraid of anything. She tilted her face up. "Shout one, brother, you still love me." The Michael snorted and yanked the man to his feet. "No, stay here and die." He was already ahead of her, holding Emma in his arms. Ivy quickly followed him out the door. The others were finally relieved to see that Michael had brought the people out, and that the embassy side had contacted the local authorities to get them to a safe temporary settlement. The people outside scrambled to get on the bus, escorted by 2 military vehicles, one in front of the other, to the temporary relocation site. Ivy came out late. The other cars were full, and could only sit in a car with Michael and a few other military personnel. She was carrying Emma, and paused as she got into the car, and Michael had taken the baby from her and all aboard. Pulling forward, suddenly an emergency brake was applied. Words came over the radio communication: "Captain, there's an ambush," and the words were followed by the sound of a heavy machine gun fire. The bullets hit a bulletproof military vehicle, cracking windows all over the place. Ivy pokes her head out to see what's going on outside, and Michael's quick as a flash pushes her head down and stays well. "Gunslinger." Emma woke up to the sound of gunshots, her eyes full of panic. Ivy was busy covering her eyes, thinking that it wasn't right, then covering her ears. "It's okay, it's okay." The Emma opens her mouth, whines like a kitten, misses her mommy, and Ivy is silent. There was a crash, the car door opened, Lucas scarlet-eyed. "Captain, Ping's gone." No words all the way. The sun rises over the land. Ivy looked at the tall figure in front of her. Michael had his back to her, couldn't read his expression. Lit a cigarette. Gulped down. Ivy knew he was in a bad mood. He'd lost a comrade in the shooting on the road. She came up behind him, thought about it, reached out and circled his waist, and Michael knew it was Ivy, and reached out to free himself from her confinement, but she held him in a death grip around the waist, and the corners of Michael's mouth quirked up in a mocking smile. "What are you doing? All these years you've been going through this." He didn't say it, and Ivy guessed that it wasn't easy for him, with all the gunfire and the possibility of losing his life at any moment. The Michael licked the corners of his mouth and snorted, "How I live is my choice. It's you. If you have any conscience, go back to your country, and she's not much better off staying in this shithole either." Ivy's tears fell swiftly onto Michael's back, which rolled in the heat. Wearing only a dark green t-shirt. "Xiaozhuan, do you remember what I said to you yesterday? You still love me, don't you?" Michael stiffened, recovering his naturalness in an instant. He stomped out the butt of his cigarette, not even looking at her, turning back to head back while she let go of his hand. The plane to pick up his people would be here at noon. The Ivy was the second oldest in the family, with an older sister, and when she was born, her father, John, was on the upswing of his career, and her mother, Rose, was rapidly engaged in the diplomatic service after she was 1 month old. So her grandparents brought Ivy from Washington to England and raised her with them until she was 5 years old, when she knew a little more about things, and when her father and mother were less busy, and then they returned her to Washington. The day she first met Michael, Ivy was following her sister, Amelia. The children in the compound were all in groups, and a group of them were very curious when they saw such a small doll behind Amelia. David, still a half-big doll himself, froze and reached out to pinch Ivy's pink little cheeks, and he asked, "Amelia, where did you get such a snow doll?" The Ivy didn't know who the other man was, and didn't dare move, so she obediently let him pinch her, her eyes full of tears. And everyone's eyes are gathered on Ivy, the tiny person wearing a Soviet embroidered cheongsam, holding crystal tears in her eyes, full of delicate and soft breath, very different from these little girls in the compound who grew up in the north. Everyone is talking to the little girl to ask questions. For the first time in her life, Amelia got the cold shoulder and spat out 3 words, "Heal," and she is Amelia's own sister, just returned from her grandparents' home in England. Michael also heard from his family. Ivy's family has a little girl who was sent to her grandmother's home in England when she was young, and was just picked up in the past few days, and Michael estimated that it should be this Yushua's lovely powdered donut in front of him. Although Ivy is small, she knows how to climb up the pole, tugged on her cheongsam and introduced herself. "I am Ivy, my nickname is July." Such a cute little sister, just looking at it makes the heart melt. This opening can be even more amazing. Soft and sticky Wunong's soft language, good to listen to. Michael raised his chin, Michael, and kicked the toe of the person next to him, and everyone warmly introduced themselves, sort of acknowledging Ivy. The first to speak. Michael is the group of little brother and the most good-looking, but also the first to speak for her to support the scene. Ivy from now on is considered to rely on Michael. Every day after him little brother called endlessly, David, Andrew. A group of people teeth are called sour, Ivy, 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 Ivy. Michael doesn't warm up to her, but he doesn't annoy her either. Amelia is pampered, and no one can mess with her, but Ivy is soft and gentle, and when she's not messed with, she's like a bunny. But if you mess with her, she's going to get it back, and she's going to get it back, and she's going to get it back. When she was older, Ivy went to elementary school, which wasn't far from the compound, and except for Amelia, who had to be driven around by John's guards every day, all the kids in the compound walked to school. Amelia doesn't like Ivy, and Ivy isn't close to Amelia. Ivy went to school every day on her short legs, following Michael and the others, who didn't say anything but deliberately slowed down to wait for her. And the boys, who waved their cats and dogs along the way, also teased Ivy, the snow doll, from time to time. By the time Ivy was in 4th grade, Michael was promoted to middle school, which was not on the same road as the elementary school and far from the compound, so Ivy could no longer go to school with Michael. Going to school by herself every day, Ivy's thought was that she had to study hard and grow up fast, and then she could study in the same school as her brother Xiaojuan. With the heavy school workload in middle school, a group of kids in the compound a little older than Ivy could no longer strut their stuff every day like they used to, and Ivy saw less and less of Michael. When I saw it occasionally, I always heard David, Andrew, and a few of them joking about Michael and Amelia, saying that the two of them had become inseparable. Ivy thought sullenly, if only she could grow faster. The year Ivy was in 6th grade, Michael happened to be a junior. Before choosing a school for junior high school, Ivy specially went to his home to find Michael. Watery eyes smiled like a curved crescent moon. She asked, Xiaojuan brother, you think about which high school you want to go to? And 16-year-old Michael has grown into a clear and handsome teenager. He wore a shirt with a white collar, and his figure is getting taller by the day. Looking at the little girl's curved crescent moon, but also smiled with a mouthful of white teeth. What? Want to be in the same school as me? Ivy's face is scarlet. I'm just asking. Michael laughs, or 1st grade. In the fall in September, Ivy got to go to school with Michael again, and like in elementary school, she was still following a couple of boys. The difference is that several of the boys in the compound have smoked bars and grown long, and are very eye-catching along the way, all boys in the throes of budding adolescence, and on the way we'll talk about which girl at school looks good. Michael rarely engages them in these discussions. David was the kindest of the few, and could talk to anyone, and a number of the girls had asked David to deliver things to Michael, pink letters, chocolates, whatever. David snarks at Michael, that so many girls haven't looked at him, and Amelia doesn't like it. Michael looks at him like he's a child. My mom doesn't want me to fall in love early. The pink letters went straight into the trash, and those chocolates and stuff to eat went into Ivy's stomach. As time went on, the girls learned that Ivy from junior high was Michael's little sister, and that it was all right to get on her good side. Then all the stuff was sent to Ivy, who took it all, and had her fill of it, but didn't say a word about it. Michael also do not stop Ivy to enrich themselves, but David strange. I said Michael, you are not like little July, right? Michael smiled and said nothing. And at that time he only thought he was doting on the little girl like a sister. The plane landed at Washington International Airport. David knew that Ivy was coming back today, so he stopped talking about business and waited at the airport to pick her up. Ivy had just come out when she saw David waving at her one by one. She walked over to him and David offered to lift the bag she was holding, and David was driving and talking to her, but he could sort of figure out to come back. And his aunt and uncle have been worried for the last couple of years. Ivy looked pale. The term is not enough, and cannot come back, a term of at least 3 years. The expiration of the term can also apply to remain, remembering that the fire in the sky, and rushed into the fire. Michael, she still came back, the good to be back. I heard the rebels blew up the embassy. Are you okay? Ivy insisted on submitting an application to go to a place like that 3 years ago, despite everyone's objections, and the group of them really sweated for her. What could it be? Ivy looked out the window. The sides of the wide street had changed, but it was still the same lights and greenery. She has experienced so much in these 3 years, from bullets grazing past her when she followed her leader out to work. From places she passed by one moment to places leveled by war the next, from many displacements to many disasters and illnesses. She didn't want to tell her friends and family if she didn't have to and make them worry. There was silence in the car. David held his tongue for half a day, but in the end he couldn't hold back. Michael went on a mission to Afghanistan. Have you seen him yet? It's a dead end, that everyone wants to avoid, but has to mention. See, if it wasn't for that man, she wouldn't be here, safe and sound, talking to David. Ivy hung her eyes, twisted her fingers, and didn't know what she was thinking. 3 years ago she left in a hurry, leaving a mess behind, that group of them. No one believed that she and Michael were really broken, but she really did. It's been over 3 years, and I haven't heard from anyone that the two of them are still in touch. It's just a bunch of them who grew up together, and Ivy's basically out of touch with them. July. Amelia's matter, regrettably, David health a pair of peach blossom eyes, talk to anyone flat out with a hangdog feeling, favor to take Ivy no way, as a life coach. In a few days is Michael's birthday, I host, you also a piece of it, to meet the people. I'd rather tear down 10 temples than ruin a marriage, not to mention the fact that they grew up together, and Michael and Ivy have an enviable relationship. David didn't crack, and Ivy wasn't stupid. She nodded. Brother David, thank you. David hooked the corner of his mouth. Thank you, what thank you? Since the first time I saw you, I treat you as my own sister. Ivy didn't go back to the compound and ask David to drop her off at her apartment, which was near the diplomatic academy, or the one her parents had bought for her for the convenience of going to school back in the day, when she had only just gotten into the Foreign Service Academy. David had just dropped the man off downstairs when the secretary's call came to rush him, and Ivy told him to hurry up and get on with his business. The apartment's been unoccupied for a long time. It's dusty. Ivy wrung out her paddle and got ready to clean up when the doorbell rang. She opened the door and was startled by Olivia, who was scratching her head on her cell phone. Ivy is happy. Just now on the road David brother mentioned you, said you don't know where to go wild again. Olivia was the youngest of their group, 2 years younger than Ivy, and a huge fan of Ivy's. If Ivy had grown up as Michael's heel, then Olivia was Ivy's heel. The Olivia bristled. David just knows how to make me up. Sister July, look what goodies I brought you. She pointed to the floor by the door, a huge pile of side dishes. You just got back, surely you didn't have time to buy those. And Ivy and Olivia tugged their stuff in together, and Olivia offered to help Ivy wipe down the table, asking, slightly nosily, Sister July, you haven't gotten over that guy, have you? She's firmly on Ivy's side of the fence. After that incident 3 years ago, Olivia couldn't help but taunt Michael every time she saw him, but when you think about it, Michael didn't do anything wrong. Ivy uprooted. Michael did not see a good life, second-class merit, third-class merit, a whole lot. And what is the captain of the Special Assault Brigade, what regiment chief of staff, what is not with the birth of death in exchange for? Ivy gone, he seems to even life and death are light, and Ivy answered dryly, that she couldn't forget, so she came back and Michael took his birthdays consistently lightly, counting 3 years back, and every year he was either on a mission or waiting for a mission in his unit on his birthday. This time, a group of people in the compound want to give him a birthday. It is better to say that he has been getting together with everyone over the years, and he has found a suitable reason for everyone to come out and get together. He's just back from Afghanistan, and it's not important, so he gave his brother face and agreed to do it. The last time he had a birthday was when he was in military school. When he was a sophomore and Ivy was a senior. He remembered that afternoon. It was exceptionally hot. The instructor first let a class run 8 kilometers, and then took the men to the shooting range to compare shooting. In the whole class, it was just him and Christopher chessing it out until the end, and the whole shooting range smelled of smoke from both of them. Suddenly, someone shouts, Michael, there's a girl named Ivy here to see you. His hand trembles, and he's off, losing to Christopher. In a place like a military academy, where there are so many wolves and so little meat, when they hear it's a girl, a bunch of bloodthirsty lads raise their eyebrows. And Michael, there's the little girlfriend. Michael put away his gun, drew his legs and headed out of the room. He saw Ivy wearing a white cotton dress, her hair black and long and straight, standing docilely in front of the school, seeming to grow, a pair of slender legs more and more straight and slender. The little girl's face flushed when she saw Michael. Xiao Zhuan brother. He was much taller than her, and raised his hand to touch her head, her hair smooth. And how did you get here? She winked and winked. It's your birthday. Wanted to celebrate your birthday. His heart instantly softened. His school is in Jiangqing. Jiangqing is more than 1,000 kilometers away from Washington. A 16 or 17-year-old girl, alone, ran more than 1,000 kilometers, just to give him a birthday. That took a vacation. Well, she looked at him with particular seriousness. I'm a good student. I won't delay that was the first time Ivy had seen Michael in uniform, military green training uniforms that seemed to smell of sweat, but were also magnificent and hot-blooded, and made people incredibly grounded. Michael didn't blame her and was going to take a leave of absence from his counselor to show her around River City. Leave. He did not feel comfortable with her. A little girl standing outside, froze with her into the school, across half of the campus to the administration building to find counselors, was seen by the students. One or two have come over to tease, Michael, this little beauty is who introduce it, then, and so on. Michael scowled and pushed them away, telling them to stop talking nonsense, while Ivy's face turned even redder. And military school management is strict. Michael usually rarely come out, but because Ivy came, he is also familiar with a lot of places in Jiangqing. After dinner in the evening, the little girl dragged him back to the hotel and carefully brought out a cake. To be honest, the cake was a little ugly. I made it myself. I brought it from Washington. Michael's heart softened all of a sudden, and she lit his candles, sang him a birthday song, and forced him to make a wish that he remembers the sweet, creamy taste of that cake. The next day he bought her a plane ticket back to Washington, D.C. and drove her all the way to the security checkpoint before reluctantly leaving. Later on, either it coincided with her being busy with her college entrance exams, or he was on a mission, and he never celebrated his birthday again. Michael wrinkled his nose, fished a cigarette out of his pocket, lit it, and it was a habit he had acquired over the years, and when he had something on his mind, he would always light a cigarette. And seeing David, he dusted off the ashes of his cigarette, and David and Michael made their way to the booth, snickering and kinda acting like it. Michael didn't wear a military uniform. He wore a not-so-formal shirt, slacks, and the collar buttons were loosened by two, I don't know whether intentionally or unintentionally, vaguely revealing a fine chest, provoking thoughts of in the box at the bar. The gang is basically all there, the same group that was there when I was a kid. Andrew, Michael, Benjamin, and David, the four most ironic ones, were there. The four of them being the kid kings of the group of kids in the compound at the time, and the others all came up and said, "Happy birthday, boss," David called Olivia. And the noise on the other end of the line was so loud that Olivia said she wouldn't come, and that she didn't know where she'd gone crazy. Michael and Ivy had a big thing going, together or apart, and there weren't many people in the compound who didn't know about it. G-Bai yelled, "How come Grace didn't come? Brother Michael is not interesting enough." Grace is the granddaughter of Michael's grandfather's old subordinate, and Michael's old general had the intention of setting the two up, intentionally or not, so that the two met and left each other contact information. Grace calls and tweets Michael, and Michael returns them, and occasionally he takes a vacation, and the two of them have dinner together. And it's really like they're trying to pack up their minds and have a good time. David slap on the back of G-Bai, "Brat, what are you talking about? We are a couple of small feelings, together to Michael's birthday, two outsiders to do what?" "She had an interview today." Michael looked down at his cell phone, but there was nothing to see. He does not play games. WeChat is not often used. The circle of friends do not send one in 3 or 5 months. I just got a message from Amelia, "Brother Michael, happy birthday, I'm praying for you under the sutra. Do you have any birthday wishes? Let me know and I can ask for them for you." There is also a picture of Amelia sitting beside a pile of Mani stones in a grand and elaborate Tibetan robe, with snow-covered mountains in the distance, as well as sutra streamers flying with the long winds of the plateau. Michael back, "Thank you." "No, no, no." The crowd clamored to cut the cake, and David looked at the watch on his hand, and what a time it was. "Cut it, cut it. I knew you guys had a craving." David's helpless. "You're not coming." Ivy's character has long been he touched the door 3 years ago to run fast, like an ostrich. "Do not be today and afraid. Do not dare to come to the." Michael found a lighter in his pants pocket and lit the candles one by one, his eyes gazing into the firelight as if he saw a pair of slender hands, flaring the candles. Andrew went to turn off the light when the door was suddenly pushed open and Ivy wore a floral dress, serene and beautiful, just standing in the doorway, Ying's eyes looking at the people inside. Let a person feel the heart of the pity. Of these men, only David knew that Ivy was back, and the others saw her, more or less with surprise. Michael clasped his hands to his chest, glanced slightly sideways at Ivy, then turned his gaze back to the air is slightly stagnant, and Andrew lowered his eyes, seemingly a little offended. And David walked over quickly and pushed Andrew to the side, forgetting to mention to everyone that July had just returned, his hand on Ivy's back, pushing her inside in traffic jam on the road. "Sorry. The ministry granted her leave. She's been setting up her home for the last few days, hadn't been back to Washington in years, didn't even realize how bad the traffic had gotten in Washington. Also, it wasn't much better a couple of years ago." Ivy's eyes flicked around the box. David, Andrew, Benjamin. The ones they'd played with the best were there, and there were some others, too, who knew each other. Happy birthday, Ryuichi. Michael's gaze abruptly turned back, settling on Ivy, the happy. How can you be happy, so many days and nights, so many times on the brink of life and death? All I could think about was her. Ivy walked over to Michael's side and placed the square locket in her hand in front of him, a pocket watch of some age, which she had picked up at an Afghan yard sale. I heard from the merchant who set up the stall that the pocket watch originally contained a picture of a white woman, and that because it had been so long and was really unattractive, the merchant, fearing that he would not be able to sell it, took the picture out, and Ivy had her picture specially shuffled and carefully placed in her pocket watch. He pushes things away. I don't take it, Ivy laughed. It took me a long time to find that. Without a word, Michael stood up resolutely and headed out of the He's the star of the show today. As soon as David pulled the man to his feet, Michael had his hands in his pants pockets and was looking absently at Ivy. The Ivy looked at him, too, in a straight and unobtrusive stare, and half a moment later, she bowed her head in some frustration. Suddenly remembering that something had come up, and leaving first Benjamin tried to pull her back, she lowered her eyebrows hastily. Sorry, I'm really in a hurry, you guys have fun, and she's walking fast, messaging David as she goes, I'm taking a cab home, you guys have fun, not messaging David, the guy's gonna have to chase him out of there. David looked at his cell phone, the rare time he spoke to Michael in a serious manner, not even giving July a chance, really planning to break it off with July and have a life with that anchor of some kind. Michael absently pulled out the candle, long broken, the Ivy left in a hurry, and even if Michael didn't accept it, the gift was still left for him. David opened the little blue box that Ivy had brought and took the thing out and shook it in his hand. Such a nice thing, and it's a pity that. He made a move to throw it in the trash. Michael moved faster than David, snatched it up and threw it back in the box. You're allowed to look at what someone gave me. You don't want to, David laughs. Andrew and Benjamin cut the cake and gave it to the crowd. Not that many people really came for the cake, but for the camaraderie of having grown up together. The group broke up and came out, and saw that Ivy, who had said she had to leave beforehand, was now sitting on the doorstep, her shoulders shrugged as if she were crying. Michael paused in his tracks. Everyone expected him to go over, yet he just lit up a cigarette and watched from a distance, and in the middle of the day, he threw the butt into the trash can beside him and left, having to go back to the team tonight. Andrew stepped over and took his place beside Ivy. Ivy looked up at him with tears in her eyes, whimpering like a kitten, and Andrew was so angry. But he couldn't get it out. He sighed. July, what did you do to Michael back then? Why did you come back to mess with him? I'm not messing with it. Ivy's in denial. How hard Michael has suffered these years. No one knows better than me. Andrew and Michael in a troop. Michael's experience in these years, he is the most clear. You are good, said to leave. He lived like a walking corpse. It is not easy to slow down, to get himself to death. You know he was almost inserted into the heart of a knife by a drug trafficker. You know how many scars on his body. You know that he was so born to die. Because of what? With that, Andrew turned and walked away. Ivy buried her head in her lap, not knowing how many tears she had shed. David pulled the person up, and good and funny, not go back, grow up. He pulled Ivy into the car, he drank, cannot drive the car, let Benjamin send Ivy home. He then and Benjamin a piece of back to the compound. Andrew's those words, do not you take it to heart. He is also concerned about Michael. The Benjamin in the government for many years, has been a hand of Jiangqing. Assistant, people more and more deep, looking at Ivy that aggrieved look, remembering the childhood of that bright as the snow of the little girl, the corners of his mouth slightly curved. Just David want to send you to lose. I see. Michael guarded it tightly. David concurred, saying one thing with his mouth and another with his heart. Ivy wiped a tear from her eye. He almost died. Is that true? There was a silence in the air and David laughed awkwardly. This is not good to live. This work, I'll have to suffer a little injury. 2 years ago Michael was on a mission and was stabbed while chasing a drug dealer. Benjamin said Michael's work with the nature of confidentiality. Exactly how it happened they are not clear. Only to remember that the same day the person with a military helicopter from the southwest border to the military region to the general hospital, the operation alone was carried out in 7 or 8 hours, finally the life back, and the military region to the general hospital. When Benjamin went to check on Michael, he was still unconscious, and when he saw the corners of his mouth move slightly, Benjamin lowered his head and vaguely heard him say, July. In the end, he couldn't forget it. Even when his life was at stake, he said Ivy's name. Ivy tugged at the corner of her mouth. I know. Ivy reported to the ministry, and she an officer in recent years into the Ministry of People, although she has been stationed abroad before, but more or less have dealt with. I had just finished packing when Luna came to call her. Ivy, Director Rose wants you to come to her office. Ivy sucked in a breath. It was always going to be confronting that she knocked on the office door until the person inside let her in, and then she went in and closed the door behind her. Mom Rose was over 50 years old and well-maintained, with her hair meticulously and competently worn. She hadn't seen her youngest daughter in 3 years, and the child never contacted them. Probably because Ivy hadn't been raised with her when she was a child, and the child and she weren't rusty but not close either. As a mother, she has always viewed both children equally, and she loves Ivy, but she doesn't know how to express it. Rose was angry, indignant, and had thought of a bunch of things to say to revile Ivy before she saw her, but when she saw her, in the end, she went soft and have been back for so long. Do not know to go home to visit the elders, the rules have been learned in vain. Rose saw her hanging her head, the words a little gentler. Your father misses you, go home to eat a meal on the weekend. The Ivy smiles formulaically. Good. When she left, she didn't go home, she didn't contact them, not only because of the unwarranted favoritism they showed the man 3 years ago, but what she loathed more than anything else, was seeing the man at home, the favorably. That person has broken his leg again. It is considered to repent most of the time. Every time she thinks of that person, her mood is very complicated again. The work of the translation division is unusual and urgent. When there are no assignments, one reads books and recharges one's batteries. When there are assignments, one translates materials or carries out simultaneous interpretation for meetings and leaders, day in and day out. After a rare weekend off, she was awakened early in the morning by a phone call. And Ivy didn't dare to slack off for fear that it was a call from the ministry. She picked it up. Sister July, I have a stomach ache, a special ache. It's Olivia, where are you? Without waiting for the other to finish, Ivy asked. She was on the phone with Olivia as she rolled out of bed and got dressed, brushed her teeth, washed her face, couldn't put on her makeup in time, and hurriedly took a cab to Olivia's apartment. It took getting someone to the hospital to realize that Olivia had gone out drinking again last night. No wonder David said the girl was always going out and getting crazy. The hospital was overcrowded. Outside the clinic were all waiting patients. Olivia carefully picked at Ivy's palm. Sister July, don't tell my family, don't tell Brother David, don't tell my family, don't tell Brother David, 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 don't tell Brother David. Olivia visibly cringed at the mention of David. It's a rare occasion when she has someone she's afraid of. Ivy is still angry. I won't say anything, let you fool around. What if something bigger happens next time? Olivia was just about to speak when someone greeted her. Olivia, her name was given to her by her grandfather, full of nostalgia for her military career, and people generally call her by her first and last names, which is nice and easy on the ears. There's just one person who, whenever he sees her as a sign of goodwill, just calls her by her first name. Ivy followed the voice, and her body suddenly shook with it. The person called Olivia was a demure, elegant woman with shoulder-length hair, dressed simply and smartly, and a little bit familiar. It wasn't the woman in front of her that shocked Ivy, but the man beside her, who had one hand in his pocket, the other hanging downward, the corners of his mouth curling up with some careless look. That Michael is always like this. When wearing a military uniform, he is a good son for the country. And for the people. Take off the uniform, with some gangster, but also sunny and handsome, and he is always like this. When wearing a military uniform, he is a good son for the country and for the people. And the woman's hand came to rest on the arm that Michael had draped over it, and naturally took hold of the. Olivia grunted a nonchalant reply. There the nurse called, and the woman at Michael's side let go of his hand, and reluctantly asked him to wait for her, and dawdled for half a dozen moments before she went in. And Olivia didn't hold back, and kept throwing blank stares that way, not forgetting to take care of Ivy's emotions, which I saw as mostly self-serving. Olivia went into another consulting room, too. Michael was leaning against the wall, like he was out of his mind, and Ivy thought about it, and got up from her seat and headed his way. She leaned against the wall as well, and slowly moved over to him. She reached out her foot, kicked his board shorts, and asked with a smile, birthday present, do you like it? The Michael gave her an expressionless look, dropped the. Ivy smiled, lied, you obviously took it. That's what David himself told her. It's true, it's not false. She was hurt by him that night, that's why she crouched in the doorway and cried for so long, but when she thought about it, she didn't think it was necessarily the same thing. Michael, this person, never waves. Even a few years ago when the two loved the deepest, he just quietly good to her. If it is not like the person, he really will not give the face of the face at all. If I hadn't thought about her at all, my birthday present would have gone in the trash. And in Afghanistan, afterward she listened to counselor who said, at that time, the embassy is almost burned down, hurt her inside. Michael life don't want to rush in, who counselor also lamented, really worthy of the people's sons and daughters of the army, since the ancient heroes out of the youth. Michael, a little annoyed, reached into his pants pocket for something, cigarettes and lighter out, remembered that he was in a hospital, and helplessly put his things away again. Ivy's smirk became more pronounced as she reached out and poked him on the back of his hand. Girlfriend, Michael laughed softly and didn't move away from her. How about it? Ivy, not expecting him to answer so dryly, froze, and said, after a moment's interval, not like that. Michael gave another laugh, as if to taunt her, that no one could live without anyone, and that no one should wait in place for anyone. And Ivy was struck by lightning, but did not die, aggrieved. Shavwan brother, I really cannot let go of you, without you, I really cannot live. Michael finally looked at her sideways, and he's looking at her so hard, like he's trying to see right through her, and Ivy got a break and tugged at his cuffs while he was thinking, I meant what I said, I never forgot you. The Michael's face is cold and unashamed. At that moment the woman came out from inside and was a little surprised to see Michael and Ivy standing next to each other, but she quickly put that surprise away in favor of a polite smile. Hello, I'm Grace. She only said who she was, not her relationship to Michael. Ivy smiles woodenly. Hello. The woman's smile looks like it's frozen. Ivy, nice to meet you. After just a brief introduction, Grace left with Michael. The Grace loved Michael and knew Michael's past. She was like a detective. She asked him about every aspect of his past, his preferences, his lifestyle, and of course, his past relationships. Grace had met Amelia and hadn't taken it too seriously. The moment she met Ivy, she was less comfortable with the idea that Michael, where are we going to eat? A few days ago colleagues and I said, Broadway Road opened a new Chongqing hot pot. As the central media's leading anchor, Grace has been very strict on their own requirements. Eating staple food is a luxury for her. She will be fat. Hot pot is not dare to eat, for fear of eating spicy oil fire acne, affecting the camera. But Michael likes it, and she's willing to go with him. Michael's driving, lack of interest, not a stomach ache, and eating spicy food. Grace forced a smile at the corners of her mouth. He never seemed to pay any attention to her, what she liked, what she didn't like, he never knew. She went along with what he liked, he took it as she liked it, forget it. Take me home. I don't have a good appetite. She raised her eyes to Michael, who looked as normal as ever, not noticing that she was down, and Michael drops Grace off at the bottom of the apartment, and Grace invites him to sit upstairs. Michael smiled politely. There's something else, another time. Every time is next time. Michael drove back to the compound, son rarely home. Caroline personally cooking. Caroline is the military general hospital famous department head, usually busy, not sitting on weekends to get a break. Michael couldn't be persuaded, and Caroline wouldn't let him hit the ground running, so he had to ask the house aunts to help out more, and he went upstairs to see Grandpa. Arriving at the old man's room, Michael knocked on the door and called aloud to his grandfather. At the sound of this, the old man was so happy that he could blossom. And Michael, old general, is almost 90 years old, in the end is in the rain of bullets to experience over, body bones are still quite strong, spirit looking 60 or 70 years old. People have no difference. The old man was past the age of being hard on his children and grandchildren, and did not bother to ask his grandson about his work. He touched out a game of chess, and asked Michael to play it with him. Michael can't talk about liking or disliking. Since he was a child, the old man was dragged to teach chess. It is rare to go home, always have to accompany the old man to spend some time. How's it going with you and the little song girl? The old man asked suddenly. Michael mulled over what to say to the old man so he wouldn't get mad, that's all. The old man, however, is still angry, smashed the chess piece to snap. What do you mean just like that? What do you mean, toying with the feelings of other young girls? The old man cliché, and began to tell Michael about Grace's grandfather Tyler back then in the battlefield to block the bullets for his own, if not Tyler for him to block the bullets to waste a hand, his life would have been lost in the founding of the country. The old man began to tell Michael about Grace's grandfather Taylor back then in the battlefield to block the bullets for himself. If Grace is in trouble, I'll help her. If she's in trouble at home, I'll help her if I can, and I'll never pass it up. Michael's down a peg. Grace, me and her, no. The old man was anxious. No, what do you mean no? What do you mean, Grace, which is not good? You and she cannot, and Ivy's little girl, you and others grew up together. I see you are a childhood sweetheart. How can not? People, Amelia, little girl, do not want you gone. You want to wait, also cannot wait for the Michael Wren's old man is splitting hairs. The old man sighed. I do not force you, but you are almost 30 years old. Sooner or later you have to live with someone. People still have to look forward. You and the girl in July less destiny. Think about something else. Since it won't work, make it clear to Song. Don't hold up the girl. Michael laughed, and answered, loudly, it was sunset, and Michael was propped up with one hand on his second-floor balcony looking out at the view. The compound is full of these small, detached, two-story buildings, with open, tree-lined roads underneath. He saw Benjamin's car pull in, and dare say it was all coming home for the weekend to spend time with the old folks at home, and as far as the eye could see, there were memories of a group of people who had grown up together, the path under the shade of the trees, which had been traveled together, the wall, which had been scaled by several men together, and which Ivy, as his tail, could not scale, and pitifully watched them on the wall from the foot of the wall, and which went out of his building, and went a little farther on, and then turned to the left, and was Ivy's house, but the little court at the far end was where a few of them played together, and a couple of little girls were sitting on the side steps cheering them on. And Ivy always has the gentle and soft atmosphere of an Englishwoman. She wears a plain dress, looking at the field without saying a word, as quiet as a splash of ink landscape painting, but every time he turned around, he could see the love and adoration crying out in her eyes. During the break, she silently unscrewed the water and held it out to him. A few other people, red-eyed, obviously already have water in their hands, but also said that July's sister how not to give them water. Ivy, thin-skinned, but still took the rest of the water, pretending to calmly unscrewed a bottle of water to hand to the other people. The touchy-feely Michael didn't even want to stay at the compound much over the years, and drove back to his place after dinner. Olivia desperately tried to explain Grace and Michael's relationship to Ivy as soon as she left the clinic. She'd been mad at Michael for years, but Sister July loved it, that Grace really has nothing to do with Michael. If there is a relationship, it's because Michael's grandpa insisted on it. I don't think Michael is interested in her at all, it's always been her initiative. You've got your stomach pains down, and you've got the strength to talk so much. Ivy's concern isn't so much about Michael and Grace's relationship as it is about Michael not accepting her anymore. It's been 3 years, she realized that it's easier to just walk away than anything else. The hard part is the person who stays behind. 3 years ago she did the desertion, leaving him to bear all the burden. Will he forgive her? Michael was either in the army or on a mission during the week, and on the rare occasions when he came back, other than going back to the compound to visit his elders, he stayed at his own place. His place was less than 100 square meters. He paid the down payment with his own saved salary before he and Ivy got engaged. Even the decoration style was according to Ivy's preference. At that time, he thought that they would have a home soon. Michael came out of the elevator and was pulling out his keys to open the door when he saw a man. The girl standing in front of his house was deliberately dressed up, with cold makeup, a black cake dress, a slender neck and protruding collarbones that made her as beautiful as a black swan. She seemed to be tired of standing, leaning against the door, lifting her right foot and shaking her ankle. The thin heel of her high-heeled shoes shook through. It looked like it had to be 8 or 9 centimeters anyhow. Michael frowned. Ivy froze when she saw Michael coming, stood up straight. Andy didn't realize security was so bad here anymore. He walks by, moves over. I opened the door. Ivy moved a few steps to the side, but refused to move too far away from him. I followed someone else up here. She asked David before she came, and David told her that Michael was still living here. And David asked her what she was going to do, and she didn't have the heart to tell David, and she didn't know if he was there or not. After all, he didn't have a lot of leave, and he was in the army pretty much all year round, so let's take our chances. And Michael is an all-encompassing person. When he bought the house here, the most important point is security, followed by supporting facilities. He cannot often be around her. She, a little girl to live in the place, naturally have to be safer. In this neighborhood, you need fingerprints to open even the cell doors. Michael opened the door and propped his hand on the doorframe to watch Ivy. She doesn't say a word. He pulled the doorknob to close the door. Go back if there's nothing else, she snapped and reached over to grip the door handle as well, and pushed her way in as hard as she could. Michael, not unable to squeeze her, but afraid of hurting her. She came in by the way, and he didn't change his shoes. He turned around and headed inside. Nothing to look at in a good light. The Ivy didn't care that she still had her heels on. She jogged over to Michael and hugged him from behind. No matter what, I really know I'm wrong. I'm sorry, Xiaoxuan. Let's be good, okay? Michael's body is lean and magnificent, with broad shoulders and narrow waist, arched buttocks and long legs, and unlike some of the muscular men of today, each of his muscles is tightened to the right degree, giving the impression of strength without exaggeration. Ivy's hand moved restlessly, down and then down, creeping up on his belt buckle, as if electrified. He snapped off her hand and he didn't control the force. Bone against bone made a not-so-subtle thumping sound. And he swept his pale eyes over to see that the back of her hand was already red, and Ivy's dark eyes had a resigned look in them, but she just wouldn't give up, stepping forward and clasping her hands tightly around his waist again. He hit her, and she was in pain, but what was such pain compared to what he had been through? When I saw you with Grace today, I was really scared. Michael's head was bowed, looking at her hands clasped around his waist, the corners of his mouth curved slightly. Afraid of what? I'm afraid that one day you'll get married to someone else and have kids and never look back. Spoken as if she knows everything. Michael didn't answer, her head rubbed against his back. You must not be together, right? He didn't want to answer her question. She and he grew up together, how to say, has been his follower for many years. The slightest loosening of his attitude, she is sensitive to feel it. I'll stay here tonight, okay? No way.